في عقد الأشعار وفقه مالك وفي طريقة الجنيد السالك.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. آمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. قال الشيخ رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه وبعلوم مشايخنا في الدارين آمين. فصل: فروض الغسل قصد يحتضر فور عموم الدلك تخليل الشعر فتابع الخفي مثل الركبتين أو مثل الركبتين وال والإبط والرف نعم والإبط والرفغ وبين الأليتين وصل ما عسر بالمنديل ونحوه كالحبل والتوكيل. سننه مضمضة غسل اليدين بدءا والاستنشاق ثقب الأذنين. مندوبه البدء بغسله الأذى تسمية تثليث رأسه كذا. تقديم أعضاء الوضوء قلة ما بدء بأعلى ويمين خذهما. طيب إذن يا إخوة والأخوات, today inshallah we're going to be going over the obligations in terms of ghusl. When we last spoke, we went over the adab qada al-haja, the rulings in terms of the call of nature, cleaning oneself in the restroom, and making sure that we're following the correct rulings there. And there are many rulings actually that come out of that. And one can, in each bab, in each topic, and each discussion throughout the text of Ibn Ashir, one can spend subhanallah days on it with the different opinions of the fuqaha and the school, and the disagreements that the scholars have, or the definitions that the scholars have. It's important for us when we're going over these rulings that we have a realistic approach, a realistic approach, because our objective here is to give da'wah to the mass of the ummah, as opposed to having a specific conversation amongst Tullab al-ilm. So we're not going to get into a lot of the far'i issues or the in-depth issues of the school. That can be in terms of ghusl and the future chapters. We'll be covering it with a slight overview, and sometimes maybe we can bring a gem in here or there. So Ibn Ashir rahimahullah, he begins by saying fasl. Fasl, we mentioned before, is what means like a section. He wishes in this section to talk about ghusl. And ghusl itself, there's two different words. We can either say in the Arabic language ghas or ghusl. Ghas, they're both spelled the same way. Ghain, sin, and lam. Al-ghasl with a fatha refers to the action of washing, or the source of the verb itself, yani the act of washing oneself. غسل يغسل. لكن غسل with a dhamma refers to the noun, denoting the ritual bath, that is required for certain acts of worship, such as after sexual impurity, meaning janaba or menstruation. So the linguistic definition that we have here further highlights the precision and depth of classical Arabic, subhanallah. When we see the difference from one vowel mark of a fatha to a dhamma, we notice the intricacies of how this deen is to be taught and understood, and the meticulous detail that the fuqaha went into in terms of writing these books. We do not have to make the extra amount of effort to sit here and try to understand or make tafsir or make ijtihad of the Quran and of the Sunnah. With what we have before us from the fuqaha of the past, we have these books such as the Matn of Ibn Ashir, al-Murshid al-Mu'in, we have the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd, we have the Mukhtasar of Khalil, Aqrab al-Masalik of Dardir, and so forth, that we may be able to access the rulings in terms of our faith. Unlike the people of today who wish to say that they follow the Quran only, or the Quran and Sunnah only. Go ahead. What end is that going to bring? Except the destruction of oneself. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from that. Ameen ya Rabb. طيب. We're now going to get into the obligatory elements, or the obligatory, the obligations of ghusl. And there are four. There are four obligations of ghusl. The first obligation, and as we've mentioned before, by the way, obligations, if it's an obligatory act, if it's missing, the ghusl is what? Incomplete. But if a recommended act is missing, is the act incomplete? No, it's not incomplete. Right? And this is an important distinction that we have to make. This is why we teach ghusl and wudu and salah and all of these ritual acts of worship in this way, so that we understand what it is that's obligated and what it is that is a sunnah, in case if we miss something or we make an error or a mistake. So we'll be looking at the obligatory acts, followed by the mandubat and the fada'il of ghusl, and the sunnah of ghusl, and we'll be able to define them one by one, inshallah. So number one, from the obligatory acts, the niyyah. The first obligation in wudu and any act of worship is always niyyah. The niyyah in ghusl is to purify oneself. The intention is to purify oneself, separating the act, ghusl, from ghasl. The niyyah changes ghasl into ghusl. Does that make sense? Because theoretically, I can go and take a bath and have and be doing the same actions of ghusl, but the difference that distinguishes ghasl and ghusl from each other is the niyyah. That's the first one. That's essentially it, right? Because this niyyah is what changes it into an act of worship. An act of worship. There are rewards. Allah Azza wa Jalla rewards us for following acts of worship. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards the one for going from a state of janaba in the halal into a state of tahara in the halal. The Prophet ﷺ was asked by his companions, and the hadith is longer than what I'm mentioning, like in bil khulasa, they were asking about the approaching their spouses, and the Prophet ﷺ said it was rewardable. There was a reward for approaching one's spouse, having jima' in the halal. Of course, because the opposite of it is haram. Zina is haram. Likewise, when you do the halal, you're rewarded for it. And when you do tahara, it's an act of, and when you do tahara, when you do the ghusl, this is an act of worship. There's a reward in it too. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow for us to benefit from what He has given us. Look at how generous Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, merciful He is to us. So the first act is to make a niyyah. Now the intention is to perform the obligation of ghusl, but it can also be to make permissible what was forbidden, or to eliminate a ritual impurity. What do we mean by make permissible what was formerly forbidden, such as prayer or reciting Quran, which are otherwise prohibited without ghusl? Okay. And the Nazim here, he refers to it as qasdun yuhtadar. The niyyah, he refers to it as qasdun yuhtadar, which is an intention. It's translated as an intention that is brought to mind. And this reflects the significance of being conscious and deliberate when performing ghusl, as the intention transforms the act into a spiritual purification, as we've mentioned previously. The next is continuity, which is fawr or mu'alah. The idea here is that, like in wudu, the body must be washed without significant breaks between different parts. And if one interrupts the process, the ruling depends on the reason for the break. For example, there could be an intentional break. Then one must start over. If you broke the wudu, if you took a break from your ghusl intentionally, then you should start your ghusl over. If there was a forgetful interruption, the ghusl is continued where you left off. The break is not over. The third is the inability to continue. This is such as, for example, you need to go fetch more water. You ran out of water, which permits one to resume ghusl without restarting, provided the delay is brief. Number 4, which is the fourth obligation, which is the fourth obligation, which is dalk. The author here mentions فور عموم الدلك. ما معنى الدلك? We've spoken about dalk before. The entire body must be rubbed to ensure that the water reaches all areas. You can't just jump into the shower and take a shower. We have a difference of opinion with the Ahnaf here. And so the water must reach all areas of the body. The author Ibn Ashir, he specifies umum al-dalk, rubbing all over the body, emphasizing that no part of the body, umum al-dalk, emphasizing that no part of the body should be left untouched by water, including hidden areas like beneath the knees, the armpits, the navel, and the folds of the body, including the buttocks. This is what he means by وَبَيْنَ الْأَلْيَتَيْنِ. Number 5, which is running the water through the hair. And this is kind of part of 4, right? This is a little bit part of 4. And he says تَخْلِيلُ الشَّعْرِ. If I would put it I'd put this as like, if you had number 4, I'd put this as like 4a, because this is understood when somebody tells you dalk, to rub every part of your body. One would assume that this is the hair. Like in the fuqaha, look at how they're specific. Look at how they intend their words. So running the water through the hair, takhleel al-sha'r, is that one must ensure that water reaches the scalp by running fingers through the hair. Especially if the hair is thick. The same applies to facial hair, such as beards and other body hair. This obligation ensures that all parts of the body, including the hair, are thoroughly cleansed. So these hard to reach areas, such as beneath the knees, the armpits, between the buttocks and the navel, and the folds of the thighs, one must clean these areas. If one is unable to reach these areas, like, few people can reach behind their back, right? The author here, he suggests it. He says, وَصِلِّ مَا عَسُرَ بِالْمَنْدِيلِ. Al-mandil is like a cloth. وَنَحْوِهِ كَالْحَبْلِ, and similar to it, like a rope. And so he means here is that if you are unable to reach a certain body part, you may use like a rope, a cloth, any bath tool that would reach the back area. If your spouse is with you and is bathing and is doing ghusl with you, they can rub the part of your back that needs to be rubbed. Then we mention after that the sunan of ghusl. The sunan of ghusl. The sunan of ghusl are 4. Rinsing the mouth once, beginning by washing the hands to the wrists once, sniffing the water up the nose and blowing it out, and wiping the ears with a wet finger, and making sure that you're washing the ears themselves, which is a wajib anyways. But the inner ear, so this part, make sure that you wipe these folds with a wet finger. It's a little bit, in wudu, you're just wiping it over quickly, but in ghusl, you're going into a little bit more detail. Always when you're comparing between ghusl and wudu, is that one is more serious, or one is more detailed than the other. Then there are 7. Then one must also note here as well that there is the possibility that while you're doing ghusl, you may touch your private area. So the poet advises against touching the private parts during ghusl, because according to the school of Imam Malik, if one touches the private parts, for the male at least, with the palm of the side of the hand, they must redo their wudu, because it invalidates the wudu. However, the ghusl itself remains valid. So if you're doing ghusl and you touched your private part, the ghusl is still valid. Lakin, what becomes an issue? The wudu element. Because what ghusl does essentially is ghusl and wudu together. After you've performed your ghusl, you're technically on wudu. You may immediately pray. You don't have to do another wudu after ghusl. You're immediately on tahara. Because ghusl is higher than wudu. Ghusl is stronger than wudu. And we see even from the 4 schools, the majority of the fuqaha, يعني Malik, Shafi'i, Imām Ahmad, touching the private parts invalidates the wudu, because they cite that the hadith of Busra ibn Safwan, who says that alayhi salatu wasalam says whoever touches his private part should perform wudu. The Ahnaf, however, they hold that touching the private parts does not invalidate the wudu. On the hadith of on one of the hadith of the companions, in which in which the Prophet ﷺ mentioned it as only a part of the body, meaning that it does not invalidate the wudu. This is what they understood from it. Al-Muhim, yani, for us to understand that the school of Imam Malik agrees that touching the private part invalidates the wudu. كما ذكرنا سابقا, we mentioned this before. So, when we move into the recommended elements of ghusl, it's important. We mentioned this why, because it's important, because as you're areas of the body and you're washing the different limbs, you should be careful with where your hand goes. Especially, this is specific to men. You should be careful with where your hand goes, because you might clean your thigh or move your hand over and you would touch your private part. So just be careful as you're moving through. So there are 7 recommended elements of ghusl. The first of them is to start by removing the impurities after washing the hands, as described above. And some of the fuqaha of the Maliki school, they actually put this in the place of the obligations. They actually made this obligatory. Like the majority opinion of the school is that this is recommended. The majority of the opinion of the school is that this is recommended. To remove the impurities prior to after washing the hands, as described as we've mentioned. Like overall, one should remove any impurities before they begin ghusl. So if you still have najasa on your body, you wash all of that off first. Wash all of that off first. This is before ghusl. You wash all of it off. So if you still have sperm that's on your penis, or fluid that's on your thigh, or whatever it is, remove all of that first. You can use soap and remove that. Do not go and wash the rest of your body with soap. Only wash with soap the area that needs to be cleaned. Only wash the area with soap that needs to be cleaned. Don't go and shampoo your hair. Don't do that. Why? Because those other soaps and over the body, it may block or prevent the water from reaching those areas. And so when I asked Shaykh Maḥmoud Shabieb about this, he said, do not shampoo, do not use body wash. Immediately go into ghusl. So only use soap on the area that needs to be cleaned, then and rinse it off. Then begin your ghusl. So you wash your hands after that. And you wash your hands with the water, just like wudu. And then you move into the rest of the steps. You say the basmala before beginning. That's number 2. Number 3 is to pour water over the head 3 times. This is the only action that's done 3 times in ghusl. Number 4 is to do the limbs that are normally washed in wudu, but intending ghusl. What are the limbs that are normally washed in wudu? The arms, the face, the head, the feet, right? The ears, the mouth, the nose. So this is what you're ensuring. So technically, when you begin your ghusl, how do you start it? You start by removing the impurity from your body. Then you wash your hands. This is standard. You're going to wash your hands anyways. You're going to end up washing your hands. After you've washed your hands, then you go into the parts of wudu. You go into the parts of wudu. You're not intending wudu. You're intending ghusl. Like, you do the actions of wudu first. Okay? Number 5 is that you use little water. After you've done let me go back a little bit. After you've done those acts of wudu, then you go into we'll get into a moment, but we'll talk about the top right, and the top left, the bottom right, and the bottom left, right, and your back as well. Number 5 is use little water. Number 6 is to start from the top of the body, and number 7 is to start from the right side of the body. So as we mentioned before, top right, top left, bottom right, bottom left. When we wash impurities from the private parts and other parts of the body. After that, avoid touching your genitals with your palm or the side of the hand or fingers, so your ghusl stands for your wudu. If you touched, but if the genitals are touched with the palm or the side of the hand or the inner side of the fingers during or after the wudu, the ghusl is not annulled, but wudu must be redone. Does that everybody understand? So let's now describe what ghusl looks like. So number 1 is we've made the intention that we are to remove our state of a major impurity, janaba, and to perform ghusl, to remove janaba and to be upon tahara. We say Bismillah. If you're in the bathroom, you just say this quietly to yourself. Number 3 is that we wash our hands to the wrist. Number 4, we wash impurities from the private parts and other parts of the body. After this, you might want to wash your hands, right? Because you've removed that. Number 5 is you wash the limbs of wudu once and continue wudu as described. Number 6, you comb through the hair with the wet fingers. Number 7, you pour the water over the head 3 times, washing the head, including the ears. And number 8 is dividing the body into 4 parts, washing it in the following order: top right, top left, bottom right, bottom left. You're going to tell me, what about the back? The back is assumed with the quadrant. So if I'm doing top right, I also wash the top right of the back. If I'm doing top left, I also wash the top left of the back. Okay? Does the order matter? The order is just to achieve the mandub. Like, if you do like top right, front right, and then front back, the ghusl is still valid. Like, if you want to get the mandub, then you're going to do it in that order, the correct order. After this, the author then gets into mujibat al-ghusl. Mujibat al-ghusl means what necessitates or obligates ghusl. He says, تبدأ في الغسل Oh, there we go. Okay. Sorry. My note's closed. All right. Bismillah. He says تبدأ في الغسل بفرج ثم كف عن مسه ببطن أو جنب الأكف أو إصبع ثم إذا مسسته أعد من الوضوء ما فعلته. We've already mentioned this. So he begins by explaining the rulings in terms of touching the penis or privates and moving with the hands and ghusl. And after he will get into موجبه حيض نفاس إنزال. He says موجبه حيض نفاس إنزال. مغيب كمرة بفرج إسجال. Let's explain this bait because it's important. The author outlines the causes that obligate ghusl. The first one is hayd. Hayd obligates ghusl. Of course, when a woman's menstrual cycle ends, she must perform ghusl before resuming acts of worship. The completion of menstruation is confirmed by either dryness or the appearance of white discharge. يعني القصة البيضاء. Number 2, postpartum bleeding or nifas. That's the second. Ghusl is required after nifas. Once the bleeding ceases, the woman is required to perform ghusl before resuming her religious duties. Number 3, inzal or ejaculation. Ejaculation, whether due to intercourse or other causes, necessitates ghusl. However, the discharge of pre-ejaculate madhi or post-urinary discharge, which is wadi, which comes from the seminal fluid, does not require ghusl, though it invalidates wudu. Does that make sense? So the discharge of this fluid due to intercourse or other causes, yani bishahwa, or what would necessitate this, requires ghusl. Lakin if it's inzal, which is an illness, it's a form of illness in which this always comes out normally. It's like salas, it's always coming out. Salas, it's always coming out. This is a different ruling, right? Or if it comes out unnaturally, this is a different ruling. It invalidates wudu. So orgasms with simultaneous ejaculation achieved under the usual circumstances, which means the following cases do not require ghusl. If there was an orgasm without an ejaculation, if there was an ejaculation without orgasm, but in cause of ejaculation with delayed orgasm, one must do ghusl according to the strongest opinion. Ejaculation unusual circumstances, such as being stung by a scorpion or bitten by a snake, scratching oneself due to sickness, such as like they have like scabs or something. These are cases in which ejaculation may happen, lakin it's due to an unnatural cause, an illness or sickness. لا حرج. What did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala يريد بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر. يريد بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر. Allah wishes for us ease and not difficulty. And this is from the blessing of being in the ummah of Sayyidina Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, that the Sharia is complete, that this Quran is complete and universal, and it's been delivered to all of mankind, and it applies regardless of the time period, because this Quran and this hadith from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers the questions of our bodies, of our souls, of our lives, every matter of this dunya, subhanallah. And so, which would be from penetration. What is penetration? Penetration vagina or any other opening, even without ejaculation. This requires ghusl for both individuals. The scholar clarifies that this applies to both living and deceased, human or non-human. Subhanallah. So, this is a lot of theoretical fiqh. Like for example, if somebody were to find a mermaid and have relations with the mermaid. Happens. Mermaids are not real, but This is the the fuqaha, they debate about these topics because what? Why? They care about all issues. They care about all possibilities. The they are concerned with every single possibility that could happen to a human being and what is the ruling about it. They ask questions and they find answers, subhanAllah. The fifth that we could possibly add here is death. Like, and obviously death would be the ghusl of the mayyit, of the dead person. You would do a specific ghusl. So the obligation, the dead person is not the one who has to get clean, in the sense of like they have to say, hey people, clean me, do ghusl of me, because they're dead. But we are, it's fard kifaya, right? So it's on the community to give the ghusl and to pray the janazah on them. And number 6, when a disbeliever becomes Muslim, this may be a cause, this would be a cause for them to do ghusl when they enter into Islam. Until ghusl is performed, we have other rulings as well that are related to these matters. So, for example, for hayd, let's actually talk about hayd and nifas. Hayd and nifas both prevent a husband from engaging in intercourse with his wife until she has performed ghusl. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they ask you, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْحَيْضِ قُلْ هُوَ أَذَى. Say it is harm, so keep away from women during menstruation and do not approach them حَتَّى يَطْهُرْنَ, until they are purified. So this also applies to postpartum bleeding, where intercourse is prohibited until the woman has completed her ghusl and has been purified. Even if the bleeding has already stopped, she has to do ghusl first. The reasoning here is that the performance of ghusl is what signifies her purification, not merely the ending or the ceasing of bleeding. The third and fourth causes that we've mentioned, ejaculation and penetration, bring additional restrictions. So a person in a state of janaba, they're also prohibited from reciting Quran. They're not allowed to recite Quran. However, the ruling for women in menstruation or postpartum bleeding is a little more lenient. They are not prohibited from reciting the Quran from memory, though they cannot physically touch a copy of the Mus'haf. And this is specific to what? To students of knowledge who are consistent in their rawatib, their ratib of reading the Quran regularly to review. So this is a specific ruling or opinion of the school of Malik, which is on its own in comparison to the other schools. So this is where Malik, for example, is one of the mas'a'il where Malik is singled out, and the 3 other schools have a different opinion. Number 2 is entering the masjid. All 4 causes of major impurity, menstruation, postpartum bleeding, ejaculation, and penetration, prevent one from entering the masjid. The prohibition stems from the potential impurity that could be introduced to the sacred space, and there is an exception when entering the masjid. There is an exception when entering the masjid is necessary. So, for example, when the masjid is the only passage to reach one's home, it's possible, right? Somebody has to cross. There's no other way. Like, they live on the opposite side of the masjid, and there's no way around the masjid. They have to cross the masjid. Back in the old days, and in a lot of areas in the Muslim world, the masjid has a courtyard. So one might need to cross through the courtyard of the masjid. Some scholars, they permit a menstruating woman from entering the mosque if she can enter and if she can ensure that no blood will escape, based on the principle of preventing defilement. Lakin, a woman on her hayd is not allowed to be in the masjid. A man in janaba is not allowed to be in the masjid. Bas, full stop. When the hayd is over, come to the masjid as you wish. If the masjid wishes to make, it's like, oh, the women are going to be masakin or whatever it is, khalas, make the program's live stream. Make the program's live stream. Goodness, she's not like shunned from the community. It's just hayd. She's quietly. She doesn't have to attend the masjid for like a week or 2 weeks. It's no big deal. The world's not gonna end. Like, and you hear some masajid, they're like, oh, they don't even talk about this issue. And it's a problem. This is a significant issue. If you are in a state of janab, man or woman, you're not allowed to be in the masjid. What are you doing in the masjid? Khalas. You're prevented from being in the masjid. Now, there also might be a case, and when I mean the masjid, I mean the salah area of a masjid, by the way. I mean the salah area of the masjid. If it's like the courtyard, which is outside, nobody prays there. If it is if it is like the lobby of a masjid, for example, the lobby, we don't have courtyards because we have snow in the northeast of the United States. So most of the masajid are covered. It's four walls and it's a four-wall building or something like that. So it's with a roof. So the lobby is kind of like the non-prayer area where people put their shoes down, or there's offices or a table or something that welcomes people as soon as they walk into the masjid. This area, a woman is allowed to sit in if she's on hayd. A man in janab is allowed to stand in if they're on hayd. Like in the area specifically that's conducted for salah, this area, the woman is not allowed to be there. She's not allowed to be there, right? This becomes problematic, especially in masajid that have like multi-use spaces. So like the masjid itself, it might have in the middle of it like a section of the carpet that doesn't look like the prayers carpet, and it's just available, right? And people can do graduations, they can do classes on that carpet, they can do presentations and so forth. This is kind of problematic because, first of all, that area, because it's multi-use, sometimes it's used for like Jum'ah overflow or whatever it is. It can cause confusion for people. Is this a place of prayer or is this a place of multi-purpose use? The best is to make the areas very clear. So you have a section that's dedicated specifically for prayer and a separate section that's dedicated to multi-purpose use, right? Whether it's for kids parties or the kids playing around or like babysitting or whatever it is, or classes or whatever you wish to conduct, dinners and weddings, whatever you wish to conduct, right? You have to try to work on making sure that those of one another. Al-Muhim, this is a mulahada, this is something that as Muslimin we have to be aware of, right? And not disrespect the house of Allah, because at the end of the day, it's not my house, it's not your house, it's the house of Allah, right? And we're His guests. So when we enter as guests, we have to respect the place as His guest. Yani we would have more ihtiram, and more respect for our boss's houses. If our boss invited us to his house, we would have more respect for his house than, unfortunately, than we have sometimes for the masjid. And this is problematic. May Allah guide us. May Allah make us better. May Allah improve our ahwal. Yani a simple review of the adab al-masjid. A simple review of adab al-masjid would be beneficial to anybody in terms of how exactly to approach the masjid. And this is, every single school of fiqh has their opinions. There are collections of hadith about these kinds of things and so forth, right? And the ulama, they've written books on this. They've written books on this subject, inshallah. So if one wants to delve into the issue more, they can always look into that. طيب. The next mas'ala or question, which is, what if I forget to wash a part of my body? Oh, before that, one might ask, let's ask a question. If I am in a state of janaba, and I'm in a state of janaba and I have finished what was halal with me with my wife, may I repeat the act again before doing ghusl? That's halal. That's halal. You can do it again. Like it's mandub, it's recommended to do ghusl as soon as possible. But if you're still with your wife and you wish to go for another round or however you wish, you can take your wife however you wish. Take your wife however you wish. Allah Azza wa Jal gives a general command to men. Take your wife however you wish. 3 times, 4 times, however you wish. May Allah bless you all. Alhamdulillah. طيب. Don't want to talk about that no more. Like, let's move into the next issue. Like, and it's important. Look, our teachers would say, لا حياء في بيان أمور الدين. There is no modesty in explaining the acts of faith and the rulings in terms of the faith. There are things and questions people have that we have to answer, so it's clear for people that they're not, and they don't fall into shak, or they don't fall into sin or incorrect acts, or speaking about the deen out of place. طيب, alhamdulillah. That's the first mas'ala, which is, can I have relations multiple times before doing ghusl? The second question that might come up is, what if I forget to wash a body part in ghusl? which is more common than you think. So Ibn Ashir rahimahullah, he actually explains this in the matn, which is forgetting to wash a part of the body during ghusl. And if a person realizes soon after completing ghusl, they only need to wash the missed part. So, for example, I was doing ghusl and I went through all of the parts of ghusl. Lakin I realized I actually forgot to wash my feet. Like I went through all of the parts of ghusl and I just went to my ankles and I didn't finish my feet. As soon as I realize this, I actually go back and I just wash the feet. Bas. I don't need to go through ghusl again. If it has been a long time since the ghusl, they're required to wash only the missed part without needing to rewash any parts already covered. The ruling here is similar to that of wudu, where one does not need to rewash the entire body, only the neglected part. And this ensures that the ghusl remains valid without excessive repetition. That in essence, if a person forgets to wash a spot of his body, he should wash that part as soon as he remembers, without it being necessary to repeat any of the other steps that come after that. But if you remembered and you prayed a prayer, so I did ghusl, then I went and prayed dhuhr, then I remembered I missed a part, I have to go back, rewash that specific part and re-pray my prayer. Repeat the prayer. Bas. So you only repeat the prayer when if you did the ghusl, you forgot a part and you realize it after you've completed the salah. You go back, you wash the specific part that you forgot, you return to the salah and you restart and re-pray the salah. However many salah that you remember doing. If you, for example, prayed an entire day, you're going to repeat those prayers. You're going to repeat those prayers. Inshallah, the next section is on at-tayammum. The next section is on at-tayammum. Bi'idhnillah ta'ala, hopefully we'll be able to finish it next class or next session. Bi'idhnillah ta'ala. As alhamdulillah, this is a good place for us to stop and reflect on what we have just covered. So, with this, there is a research question that one might ask, which is, what is the ruling on wudu of someone in a state of janaba for sleep? Let's say you are in a state of janaba and you want to go to sleep, like you do not want to do ghusl just yet. You know, maybe you're saving the ghusl for later, or wudu is not, or the or you wish to get up at some point. You have some plan, some reason for you not to do so. It is recommended or mandub for a person in a state of janaba to perform wudu if they intend to sleep before performing ghusl. The recommendation is derived from the saying of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, "Perform wudu, wash your private part, then sleep." The order of washing the private part and performing wudu is flexible, as clarified by Imam al-Zarqani in his sharh of the Muwatta of Imam Malik. In another narration that comes from Imam Malik, the Prophet ﷺ says, wash your private part, then perform wudu. Ibn Abd al-Barr explained that the phrase perform wudu means performing wudu in the same manner as one does for salah. However, in this context, the wudu is not performed for prayer, but rather for sleeping in a state of partial purification. And this is supported by another narration that comes from the Muwatta. When one of you has relations with your spouse and intends to sleep before performing ghusl, they should not sleep without first performing ghusl, as they would for prayer. Ibn Abd al-Barr added that Malik included in the hadith of Ibn Umar alongside this statement by Aisha radiallahu anha to emphasize that wudu commanded in this context is not for prayer but for cleanliness before sleep. Az-Zarqani further clarifies that this wudu resembles the standard prayer wudu and is not simply for cleanliness as one may have mistakenly believed. So the wudu should not be limited to just washing the private parts and hands, but is a complete ritual purification similar to that for prayer. Abu Umar also highlights that the recommendation of wudu for sleep serves practical purposes, such as refreshing the individual, preparing them to perform ghusl upon waking, and ensuring that they sleep in a state of partial purification in case they pass away during their sleep. It's also a sunnah. It's also a sunnah to do wudu before you sleep, regardless if you're in a state of janaba or not. Before you sleep, it's a sunnah to do wudu. This understanding is supported by a narration from a Tabrani, where Maymunah bin Saad asked the Prophet ﷺ, can a person in a state of janaba sleep? And the Prophet ﷺ said, I do not like someone to sleep in a state of janaba until they have performed wudu, for I fear that they may die in their sleep, and thus Sayyidina Jibreel or Angel Jibreel may not attend them. Additionally, the sleep time wudu is not invalidated by actions such as urination or defecation. Why? Because they're in janaba. If you make wudu after janaba, so there's a riddle question, actually, a riddle question. What wudu is not invalidated with urination or defecation? And the answer is the wudu that you do on a state of janaba before you sleep, but only by engaging in intercourse again. That's what invalidates the wudu that you do during your sleep. So if you go and you have intercourse again, that wudu is lost. Subhanallah. In addition to that, we also have other masail that come out of the state of janaba, in addition to what we discussed before. One of them being is the ruling on forgetting the state of janaba, as we've mentioned. And there is an actual narration that comes from Imam Malik, where he narrates that Zayd ibn Aslam said, I went out with Umar ibn al-Khattab to al-Jurf, and he realized that he had experienced a nocturnal emission, not a wet dream, but similar to that, but had prayed without performing ghusl. Sayyidina Umar said, by Allah, wallahi, I believe I have experienced a wet dream, and I did not realize it, and I prayed without performing ghusl. So he performed ghusl, washed what he saw from the emission of his garment, sprinkled water on what he did not see, gave the call to prayer or the iqamah, and then prayed after the sun had risen high. Meaning he prayed the prayer late, after its time. Right? Because he's making up the salah. And so, according to Imam Malik, semen is considered from the substances that are najis. And if it soils one's garment, the following rulings apply. The first is that they must wash their garment. An area affected by semen must be washed. And this is based on the hadith that we mentioned. Number two, sprinkling. Right? When someone is is uncertain whether semen has soiled a part of their garment, they can sprinkle water. As we just saw from that same hadith, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab, he sprinkled water on areas that he was unsure of if whether or not semen got onto them. Umar ibn al-Khattab stopped during a journey. It's narrated from Imam Malik that he stopped during a journey after having experienced a wet dream, and he washed what he could see from the emission and sprinkled water on what he did not see. When he was advised by Amr ibn al-As to change garments, Umar ibn al-Khattab responded. He said, if I were to do this, it would become a practice, and not everyone can afford a change of garments. Radiallahu anhum. Look at how they care about the ummah. Look at how specific they are. Amr ibn al-As is telling him a correct statement. Change your garment. This is the logical thing to do. Umar ibn al-Khattab is responding to his dear companion and brother, one of the fellow companions of the Prophet ﷺ, and his dear brother, by saying that I do not wish to be an example for others that they said that I changed my clothes. Right? And there are people who do not know who cannot change their clothes. And so the ruling is what? That you wash that specific area. Bas. He then proceeded to wash the emission and sprinkle water on the rest of the area that he was unsure of. If a woman has wet dreams, it's possible. Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha indicated that this is possible. She said a woman came to the Prophet ﷺ and asked, O Messenger of Allah, does a woman need to perform ghusl if she experiences a wet dream? The Prophet ﷺ said, yes, if she sees fluid. One mulahada, and this is from me. This is from me, not from the sharh. But looking at it, subhanallah, a woman asking about wet dreams and they omit her name out of respect and hayat for her, out of like the respect of her modesty. And this is something that's important and often lost in today's usage of social media. People ask obnoxious and obscene questions without having or say obscene statements about matters of the bedroom and about all of these things in the name of what? Transparency, without first practicing modesty and haya. And this unfortunately is seeping into the Islamic tradition and discourse that we have online and in person. A woman's honor is with her haya, her modesty. The more modesty she has, the greater her honor is. The more beautiful she is in the eyes of Allah. So even in ahadith such as this, we see that the narrators are omitting the woman's name out of respect to her. They know who she is. They know who she is. Alayhi salatu wasalam knows who she is. The narrators know exactly who she is. And this is narrated by who? Sayyidah Aisha, another woman, not a man. Radiyallahu anhum jami'an. So the scholars, they unanimously agree that if a woman or a man experiences a wet dream without ejaculation or finding any fluid, no ghusl is required. However, if fluid is present, ghusl is obligatory, as we have talked about, right? As the requirement for ghusl is tied to what? Ejaculation. So all that we've spoken about previously, about the ejaculation and that happening, is possible for women to happen to as well. And they must do ghusl too. Bismillah. Okay. طيب, this seems to be a good place to start. As the discussions, يعني, so, they might not be relevant for our majlis, like in a majlis of طلاب العلم, maybe we can provide more detail and insight and benefit from one another in that capacity. Like, alhamdulillah, this is a beautiful place for us to stop for today. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over to the stream. I know there have been a lot of questions, or it's possible that there aren't any. But if you guys have any questions, you can just place it into the chat, the comments, and yani, the team will either get back to me about it, or I'll be able to read them now. So I'll give you guys a moment. If you have any questions, please ask, inshallah. With that being said, I'll give you guys this the space right now to ask, inshallah. Okay. I see here. Could you please go over the rulings in regards to inzal? Inzal or orgasm? طيب, inzal is orgasm with ejaculation. And this is achieved under the usual circumstances. What are the usual circumstances for when ejaculation happens? Um, uh, يعني, a wet dream, for example, where the ejaculation happened, right? A You may have touched your spouse and ejaculation happened. Your spouse may have rubbed against your private area, ejaculation happened. You may have had intercourse, ejaculation happened. There are a number of ways for ejaculation to happen, right? Intercourse obviously is there's another issue, right? Because anything that enters into the any hole, khalas, this requires ghusl from there. But we're specifically talking about ejaculation. So if ejaculation happens, ghusl is on you, right? You have to do ghusl if it's from a normal and natural source. However, it's possible that ejaculation doesn't happen. Somebody may have an orgasm and ejaculation never happens. It's one possibility. Another possibility is that you have an ejaculation but no orgasm. In the case of ejaculation with a delayed orgasm, one must do ghusl according to the strongest opinion. What does ejaculation, yani clear fluid that comes out? Clear fluid versus the white fluid that's like there's pre-seminal fluid and then there's actual sperm that comes out, right? Pre-seminal fluid that comes before orgasm. So this would invalidate. This would require ghusl. In addition to that, the actual sperm that comes out, which is the orgasm, that requires ghusl too. Then there is ejaculation that happens that comes from unnatural causes. Unnatural, right? such as riding an animal. Possible this happens. It's possible that being stung by by some sort of a snake or a scorpion, scratching oneself due to an illness, right? And you're scratching oneself in the private area so much so, and then yeah, and you ejaculate because of that. There could be a number of unnatural causes, right, due to some illness or some circumstance that you have nothing to do with. Okay, but if pleasure was found and this came out, خلاص, then that would necessitate ghusl. Even if pleasure wasn't found, even if pleasure wasn't found, right? But like, خلاص, you ejaculated and you had an orgasm, done, as we've talked about before. The next one, is it only due to hayd طالبات of ilm can recite Quran from mushaf without touching, or nifas as well? Um, the ruling on women touching the mushaf, the women who are students of the Quran, yani they're reciting the Quran, they're reciting the Quran regularly, okay? They may be students who are learning to read the Quran and they need to continuously read, right? This is they're allowed to touch the mushaf and read from it, right? Um, this is for the this is for the students. Like in for the uh, we said, let me go back to what we said exactly because I want to make sure that we said was correct. The ruling for women in menstruation or postpartum bleeding is more lenient. They are not prohibited from reciting the Quran from memory. Now, though they cannot physically touch a copy of the Mus'haf. That's correct. So if then there's another exception here, and that's specifically for women students of knowledge who can actually touch the Mus'haf. Um, they can actually recite normal. So that's a very specific case, and that's a very specific exception. Other than that, the women normally reciting, I mean, regularly reciting. They're not students of knowledge, but they wish to recite, and they're in a state of hayd, and they want to review the Quran, but they're not students of knowledge. They can do so without touching the Mus'haf. Next question that we have: for how long and short times do you just wash the forgotten area? However long until you remember. However long until you remember. Right? For ghusl, that ghusl isn't wudu. Ghusl isn't nullified because you went to the bathroom. Wudu is nullified because you went to the bathroom. Ghusl is nullified, or the state of tahara and janaba in terms of ghusl, right? Hadath al-akbar. This is nullified through what? Through what we've mentioned, right? With ejaculation sexual relations and so forth, right? That's what nullifies ghusl. So, um, يعني it could take as long as you have until you remember that you've forgotten that, and if you had any prayers during that period of time, you have to remake those prayers. Assalamu alaikum. Are there any notes being shared for the class? The best notes are the notes that you were taking while I was talking. Those are the best notes. So just make sure that you're you're following up on those. But other than that, يعني alhamdulillah, once we have a gap, inshallah, we'll send some. Possibly, we may send some notes over. But we're still working on that, inshallah. طيب. With that being said, alhamdulillah, we've reached a good point to stop at for our class. If anybody has any questions, inshallah, please feel free to send messages, uh, the, or write a comment on the YouTube video, or you can message the page directly, inshallah, and they'll try to reach out. بإذن Barakallahu feekum. We'll wrap up here. وصل اللهم وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.